This video is sponsored by Carbon Method. So this adventure started out at my local hardwood dealer, Peach State Lumber in Kennesaw, Georgia. Basically, I went looking for, I was looking for something that I could put together rather quickly, so to speak. I have some classes coming up at my local woodcraft where they have asked me to teach resin. So we start out with some beginner classes, then some intermediate, and in the end, one of our goals is to do some classes on table building, at least maybe coffee table building, something smaller. So I thought, what better way to showcase that than to maybe build a coffee table, to put at Woodcraft to display the classes coming up. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm looking ideally for a slab that is 10% or less, which several of these didn't make the cut. But in the end, I did wind up finding one of spalted maple, and I thought, yeah, I can probably cut that down, kind of looking at a vision in my head. And so we loaded it up along with some other lumber that I needed. Once we got it loaded up, my next order of business was really trying to figure out what I wanted it to look like. And I got it back home and just decided to make sure I got the live edge cleaned up, cut it down, kind of got an idea in my head of what I was kind of going for, which in the end completely changed. But basically went through the process of getting all the bark off. Something you definitely want to make sure you do if you're exploring doing some live edge. Definitely got to make sure I put my safety equipment on.
I've repeatedly stated in my testimony that my rule is safety first.
You definitely want to protect yourself whenever you're messing with this, the live edge and a grinding wheel, because it makes a mess, which is why I'm outside and not in my shop. As you can see, it sends stuff everywhere. But in the end, it's a necessary evil that we have to do. You don't want to leave any of the bark or any of the layer underneath the bark on when you're doing one of these tables, because then your only bond is to that and not into the wood itself. And that could definitely separate over time. So this is probably one of your most important steps, making sure that you take the time to get all of your bark off and all of the layers underneath that. So you start with some nice clean wood. I did have to shape up a couple of places where I ended up making a man-made cut and try to make them a little more like live edge. And then basically, since this was small enough, I threw it on my CNC machine so I could get one side flat. Don't typically start out trying to make both sides flat, because I'm a firm believer in keeping it as thick as you can for as long as you can when you're looking at table builds. But it is necessary to make sure you get one side flat. And if you're thinking to yourself looking at this, man, that sure is a small flattening bit. Well, you would be correct. I do have a 4-foot by 4-foot machine, but it does have a rather small spindle. So therefore, the largest I can do is a 1/4 inch shank, which ends up being a 1-inch flattening bit. I do, however, have the Woodpeckers Pro flattening mill that I plan to dedicate a table to in my side shop. Hopefully that's going to be a video for the future on building that dedicated table. Basically, I am going to put this in the mold, and I do use tape. So there's controversy whether you want to use tape, whether you want to use mold release, or how exactly you want to do this. I have honestly found that if you use this tape, you can get tuck tape or whatever brand you want to get, but any of this epoxy or basically sheathing tape works. I never use mold release. I only use tape. And make sure you caulk all your corners and take care of them well. Knock on wood. I've never had a leak, and I hope I don't ever have a leak. but I simply just use that, and that is all. So what happened is, as I'm sitting here looking at this, I really thought, man, I don't like the way this looks. So I went back and forth in my mind on what I wanted to do. And in the end, I did want the look of this spalted maple with that piece in the center, but I quickly realized that I did not think that I wanted to continue and make this a rectangle. I decided that I wanted to do a circle coffee table. Something about the proportions and how this worked out, it didn't look right to me as a rectangle. So I decided to go the circle route. So that's what you're going to see here in a few, is me doing that. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour about a 1/2 inch layer of black epoxy. Ended up being about a 1/4 inch layer is what I went with. Something that was translucent-ish, so you could still see some light through it, but I still wanted it to be solid. So I just poured basically about a 1/4 inch layer on the bottom of that. And then I came back with some deep pour liquid glass from SuperClear and finished it off with absolutely clear epoxy on the top. I think that does a tremendous amount for giving it depth, and it just, in my opinion, looks really, really good. I've got other videos on how to mix epoxy, so I'm not going to bore you with that. But this is a deep pour epoxy, so it's going to take several days to actually completely cure. So we're going to come in and we are just going to, and just for your information, or in case you're wondering, I have a vacuum chamber that I do my deep pour in before I actually pour it into the mold, and it only holds about 3 gallons roughly. So even though this pour is a total of about, if I remember correctly, 4.5 gallons, I had to do this in several different, as you can see, these little 5-quart buckets, because that's what actually fits in my vacuum chamber. And then we just go through the demolding process, which is pretty satisfying. But as you can see here, I have no issues. Again, I use tape only. I don't use mold release. And I really didn't have any problems getting this mold off. It was straightforward, pretty easy. You can see I have a chisel here. I am going to pop that underneath the bottom to release it. But it releases very, very easily, and I'm able to pull it straight out of the mold. Once I get it released from the mold, then it is back to the CNC machine to get it flat. Now remember, we flattened the bottom to be able to sit in the mold, so we should be working with a relatively flat surface there. So we're going to set the table in the CNC with the bottom side down, and we are going to flatten the top. Again, we are going to be using the 1-inch diameter flattening bit that I have. Hopefully, again, sometime in the near future, we can get that table built so I can have my slab flattening jig set up in my smaller outdoor shop, to where I can dedicate that to just flattening slabs such as this or larger. But we'll get it loaded up on the 4x4 here, and once we get that top flattened, then we're gonna flip over this beast of a table and get the bottom flattened as well. Some of the black did get up underneath the slab. Always a problem. No matter what I do, it always seems to happen. But anyway, so we'll get that flattened down to back to the bare wood, and we'll go from there. Once we got that flattened on both sides, then we're going to go ahead and start getting this down to, I guess, technically our final dimensions. Of course, our circle is going to be our final dimension, but I want to go ahead and square up these edges here. And to be honest with you, at the time I was doing this, I still was not 100% sure what I was actually going to do as far as going with a circle or going with a rectangle. In the end, what finally made the decision for me is where the legs were going to wind up laying out on the table. If I had went with a rectangular shape, the legs would have came into the epoxy at some extent to where I would have to put threaded inserts into the epoxy, which I really don't want to do. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that if I did the rectangle, it's probably going to be a little too big for the area we were looking for displaying this. So went ahead and squared up everything here, but in the end, the consensus was I think I was going to go, with the circle. All right, let's go outside and see if we can't get this thing into a circle. So I'm using the Rockler circle cutting jig with this Bosh router. I picked it up, I think, on Black Friday for a pretty good deal. It's the same router that I have inside my router table. It's just a task to try to get it in and out of the router table if I want to use it. So I was able to pick up one at a pretty good discount. But anyway, so I'm going to run around this, and I ended up doing the full depth with the router. I probably could have just come back with a jigsaw after making a couple passes and then come back with a flush trim bit and finish that up. But I didn't. I was outside. It was already set up, so I ran around this thing probably 30 times and got that taken care of. So going to bring it inside and just do a good sanding here. I'll start out with a Rotex just so I can make sure I remove all those leveling lines and get everything down to, I think I go to maybe 180 grit. Not super necessary since I know that I'm going to actually flood coat the top of this with epoxy. It would, of course, fill in any scratches left by any of the lower grit sandpapers. But I just did the same on both sides because the bottom side, I knew I was actually going to do Rubio monocoat on it. And I know, you're never going to see the bottom. And while we're on the subject of finishes, let's take this time to thank the sponsor of today's video, Carbon Method. Carbon Method has an industry-leading ceramic nano finish that you can buy in a kit. It is super easy to apply, super easy to maintain, and will help prevent damage to your creation for many years to come. It protects against water, oil, all kinds of chemicals, can be used on epoxy and any other wood finish. There'll be a link in the description to pick up your kit today, as well as information on how you can win a kit for watching this video. All right, back to the build. Once the main sanding is done, you're inevitably going to have some imperfections. So I like to take kind of like a rake light and go across and find them all and just simply fill them in with some CA glue. And as you continue this process, you may have to do this a couple of more times just as you're doing your final sanding. Do not skip this step. It is highly important because any of these small imperfections you can either A, see, or worse yet, if you have a little pocket that decides it's going to let air out once you do your flood coat of epoxy, if that's the way you're going to finish yours, it can completely ruin the top of it to the point where you would have to sand everything back down and basically start from this point again. Once I'm happy with that, I'm just going to spray some water and water pop. This is going to give you your first shot of what it's kind of going to look like whenever you're done. I just spritz a little bit of water on here, kind of wiping it with my hand on both sides and the edges just to pop the grain. Then I'll come back and sand down with my last grit. I think it was 180, maybe 220. And for me, on the bottom here, this is completely your preference. I actually like to route in my table legs so that way that the plate, the mounting plate, is flush with the bottom. So it's completely up to you. You can absolutely screw directly into the bottom of the table. I don't recommend that. I prefer to use these threaded inserts, but it is a personal preference and you do whatever it is you need to do. So basically I just kind of measured it here and then I set my stop block up to make sure that that was my depth that I went to. And basically I'm going to route out a channel on each side and then put some threaded inserts in. And let me just say the props where they're due to this Hercules router. I actually did a comparison between it and a Skill on another video. I'll leave a link to it. But this thing actually does a really good job. Now, I've used it quite a bit. I wouldn't say I've used it a ton, but I have used it enough to honestly say that it does a really good job and certainly is worth the money you would spend on it. This is another step that may not necessarily be something you have to do, but I like to put a little bit of CA glue on my threaded inserts. You can use epoxy and do the same thing. That just makes me feel better about it, and as far as them staying in and holding in, especially if it's a piece you're going to be taking the legs off from time to time, maybe moving it around. I just feel a little bit better about it. And as I said before, here I've got a few little imperfections I had to come back and fix, and thank goodness this was for the final time. Just gonna put a little CA glue in those and get those sanded back down. So the next part I've got coming up is going to be just doing the Rubio for the bottom. And in case you have never used Rubio, it is a hard wax oil finish. It's pretty easy to put on and get taken care of. One good thing about being in the medical field is I am never in any short supply of expired syringes, which is great when you do epoxy work and also for measuring out finishes that are a 3-to-1 ratio. So I'm just going to get this Rubio mixed up, and it's only going to take, I don't know, maybe 7, 8, 9 ounces or so to cover the entire back portion of this table. It's going to spread it out with a little spreader here, and then I'm going to rub it in with just a kind of a soft white hand pad. And then all you're going to do is wait about maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes, depending on your environment. And then you're going to come back and wipe off all the excess with basically just a shop towel. So if you've made it this far in the video, I hope you've got something out of it. If you wouldn't mind, hit that subscribe button, like the video, and turn on your notifications so you get notified anytime we upload any more content. So the next part's probably one of my favorite parts. And yes, I'm having to do this in my living room. I just don't have a good place otherwise to pour, not currently. So basically all I'm doing is I'm taking up this clear epoxy with my glove and just kind of rubbing it around the edges. It just kind of breaks the surface tension and allows the epoxy to flow over the edges a little better. What you don't see here, and I didn't film, is typically I will put tape underneath the bottom and run it all the way to the edge and take a X-Acto knife and trim it off. That way it allows the epoxy to flow over the edge, but once you have all those drips on there, it makes it super easy to take off. You just simply go back and peel the tape off and the drips come with it, and you've got a clean edge on the bottom. And this is SuperClear's tabletop epoxy. It is a 1-to-1 mix ratio. I've got other videos of showing how to mix epoxy. Check them out. So I didn't go into super big detail here or show the mixing process. But basically, you got a couple of ways you can do this. You can do like I'm doing and spread it around with your glove, and that's perfectly fine. This epoxy self-leveling. Or you can take like a 1/8 inch notch trowel and spread it around. Okay, so this is where we're going to put on the Carbon Methods or Nano coating systems to protect this table. They have a great application instructional video on their website. I'll leave a link in the description. Thanks again, Carbon Method, Dan over there, for sponsoring this video and sending this kit. So if you've made it this far, let me tell you something real quick. You're going to be able to win a set of the a small kit of the Carbon Methods Nano coating system. Partnered with them to put this on. I wanted to save it to the end of the video because I really want the people who stick around to be eligible to win this. So I'm going to leave instructions down in the description on how to enter, and we'll give it probably a week or two, and we'll draw that. I'll announce it on the community page. So okay, so I'm all done. I didn't bore you with the rest of that. I went ahead and did 3 total coats of the top coat. Got that buffed off. It's going to sit here. It needs to sit for about 24 hours. Be just a little less than that. I'm actually going to deliver this tomorrow to Woodcraft in Chattanooga so we can go ahead and get this display set up. I hope you got some value out of this, and these instructional tips helped you on how to do a resin table, a river table,
or you can use the nano coating on anything. It doesn't have to be resin. It can be just regular wood or any other type finish. It'll work perfectly. So I hope you got something out of this. Check the description below for how to enter for the giveaway if you're interested in winning one of their kits for the nano coating. Put it on your next project. Thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you in the next video.